Can you beat Pokemon Platinum using only one of each Eeveelution as a hardcore Nuzlocke? Meaning if any of those Eeveelutions should faint, they'll have to be boxed forever. Seeing as there's only one Eevee in the game and a total of 7 available Eeveelutions, I had to hit up the daycare couple for half a dozen eggs. These eggs would then hatch into my team, or rather, my new family. Starting with the oldest brother, Ace. Being the oldest, he's by far the fastest and very protective of his younger siblings. The second to hatch was Dex, a bit of a goofball and not a great fighter who looks up to his brother most of all. Third was Oz, the troublemaker, never quite able to do anything productive and somehow managing to light everything on fire. Fourth was Bo, the complete opposite. This little angel never caused a problem in his whole life, and his good looks and perfect personality can make people a bit too interested for comfort. Zeke was the quiet and mature one, despite being the youngest brother, and often had to be the one to get the others out of trouble. And finally, the only girl among the siblings was the youngest, Pearl. With her silver fur, she was even cuter than Bo and took great pride in her appearance. We all know girls mature faster. I mean, here I am playing Pokemon at age 26. And unlike me, Pearl couldn't wait to grow up, being the first to evolve by reaching max happiness and level 11. But as she was evolving, something terrible happened. Her beautiful silver fur turned into a disgusting snot green. All of a sudden, nobody ever called her beautiful. And to make matters worse, her brother Zeke evolved into the most tall, dark, and handsome of boys. But even though she was hurting inside, Pearl knew she had to be strong for the family, because she knew there were many challenges they'd have to face to make it to the top. And against Rourke, her and Zeke are basically the only family members who can actually do anything. Before going into the fight, both of them made sure to almost get to level 15, just barely staying below the level cap. They also start the battle by having Pearl switch in first and then swap into Zeke immediately. This is because both Zeke and Pearl only have normal moves. But after defeating Geodude with enough defense drops from Tail Whips, the fact that Pearl swapped in first means they both reached level 15, which conveniently is when Eeveelutions learn the first move of their type. So Pearl learns Confusion and Zeke learns Pursuit. Second out is Onix, but with its massive defense, I have to continue going for Tail Whip. Then to be safe, Zeke goes for Wish to heal back most of his HP. A resisted return at max power is actually 8 base power weaker than a neutral stab Pursuit. Zeke didn't need that extra power to defeat Onix after a few Tail Whips, but once Cranidos comes in, he switches up his strategy. And despite Cranidos having an insane attack stat of 125 at this point in the game, Umbreon's defense is equally busted this early, letting Zeke easily outdamage the fossil and claim the family's first gym badge. Moving forward, we're introduced to Team Galactic, whose commander Mars can often be a bit troublesome. But in this case, Pearl and Zeke are the dream team, since Pearl's instantly able to knock out Zubat with a Confusion, and then let her brother take over versus Perugly, which can barely hurt him through his massive bulk. And getting past Mars is a big step forward, since there's a lot of great stuff we can pick up in Eterna City. But before reaching the city, we pass through one of the most important locations in the run, Eterna Forest. Dex is a really outdoorsy little Eevee who's always loved the woods, and getting close enough to this moss-covered rock was enough to make him evolve into his final form. And listen, I love Leafeon, possibly my favorite Eeveelution out of all of them, but Game Freak hates it. Leaf Blade at level 71? Excuse me, what? Doesn't help that the only other physical grass move it gets is Razor Leaf. I guess getting Leaf Blade at like level 50 would have been too overpowered, and instead we got this. On top of that, Dex barely has any good matchups in the entire game, so he's kinda here for moral support. Once in Eterna City, I head straight to the house where you can pick up the Explorer Kit, because the underground unlocks a lot of cool items. Here we can unlock great stuff like Elemental Plates to boost our moves, fantastic items like Heart Scales and Max Revives, which is literally useless in a Nuzlocke, but what we're really searching for are Evolution Stones. I end up finding the Firestone almost right away. It then took me another 45 minutes to locate a Thunderstone, and because there's a guaranteed Waterstone not too far from here, I didn't feel like doing any more digging. But with our 2 newly acquired stones, we'll be able to evolve 2 of our Eevees, starting with Ace into Jolteon. And more importantly, for where we are in the game, Oz evolves into Flareon. Unfortunately, Flareon has it even worse than Leafeon. They've really saved Flareon in the newer generations, but back in Gen 4, there was no good way to use its amazing base 130 attack stat. Even so, Flareon is our best bet going into the fight versus Gardenia, and it even has a usable special attack stat of 95. We still don't have access to any powerful TMs, so Ember is unfortunately our best bet, which barely falls short of taking out Turtwig. This allows it to set up a Reflect before Gardenia heals up with a Super Potion, which is fairly annoying. On top of that, my second Ember unfortunately gets a burn, which takes out Turtwig. The reason this is unfortunate is I don't get to stall out another turn of Reflect. Because Flareon is so somehow slower than the international delivery speed to my home country of Sweden, Oz ends up getting leech seeded, and honestly, I should have probably just taken Cherrim out the following turn, but I really wanted to get rid of leech seed, so I swap out into Dex. I then make sure to have Dex, who can't be leech seeded, take Cherrim deep into the red before swapping back into Oz, who can finish Cherrim off with a quick attack. Now we only have Gardenia's ace Roserade left to face. As if Oz wasn't already slow enough, she hits me with a stun spore, which I at least came prepared for with a held Cherry Berry. Getting fully paralyzed here could be a bit sketchy, so I'd rather play it safe and connect with the Ember to activate Roserade's Citrus Berry. This does mean a second Ember won't be able to take Roserade out, but it also means it won't put it in range of being healed. In this case, that part doesn't really matter since Gardenia's already wasted her second Super Potion against Cherrim. However, it does still put Roserade in range of Quick Attack, making for an easy badge number 2. We then have to enter the Galactic Eterna building, so I have one of my Eevees use Cut, a special plump Eevee that actually learns Cut. From here, we can take on Commander Jupiter, which goes almost exactly like the battle versus Mars. We take care of Zubat with a Confusion, and then swap in Zeke versus Skuntank, and while it ends up being a little too close for comfort, Zeke does resist every single one of Skuntank's moves, so we come out on top. The next city we reach is Hearthome City, where we can actually pick up an Eevee. This is the final member of the team, the adopted sister Nyx. She's a very competitive girl who only wants to face the strongest of foes. And speaking of strong foes, Hearthome City houses our next gym battle versus Fantina. This is definitely a difficulty spike in the game, and if you don't come prepared, this fight can really catch you off guard with a bunch of status conditions. For instance, her Duskull loves to inflict burn with Will-O-Wisp, so I make sure to lead with Oz so that that's not even a possibility. This basically leaves it only able to Shadow Sneak, and I can take it out with a few Embers. Second out is Haunter, and this thing's kinda the worst, with both Confuse Ray and Hypnosis. We do luckily have access to Lumberries by this point from the Berry Master, but Haunter could still be rough to deal with. However, instead of being super annoying, Fantina decides that resisted Shadow Claw is the way to go. She then thankfully misses a Hypnosis, allowing me to connect with a Pursuit to take it down into the yellow and then get health back from Wish. This time Haunter actually connects, going for a Confused Ray, but thankfully because of the miss earlier, we actually still have our Lumberry intact and are able to shake the confusion off. This allows us to strike with yet another Pursuit to take Haunter out, leaving Fantina with only her final Pokemon, Mismagius. The only status move this thing has is Confused Ray, which is annoying enough, but thankfully its only good damaging move against Zeke is Magical Leaf. Of course it immediately gets a critical hit, but it only does 20 damage, and with Mismagius's awful physical defense, Pursuit almost does half. But then begins the pain, as Mismagius goes for Confuse Ray, which we can't heal off with a Lumberry this time. On top of that, of course I hit myself in confusion, so I decide to swap out, sending in Ace. The idea here is pretty simple. We have Ace tank the Magical Leaf, and then we want to bait Mismagius's strongest move, Shadow Ball. The plan sort of ends up working out as I swap out into Nyx, who instead of being hit by Shadow Ball, gets hit by Confuse Ray. This at least means we won't get hit by Confuse Ray immediately as we swap back into Umbreon, and we still have a chance to dodge the next one. Best of all is Mismagius goes for Psybeam, which Zeke is completely immune to. Now sadly, we do still get hit by Confuse Ray, however, Zeke managed to pull through and hit a Pursuit through the confusion. This does unfortunately fall just barely short of getting the KO and activates Mismagius's Citrus Berry. In order to have as many chances as possible to deal damage with Zeke, I decide to swap back into Dex as Mismagius goes for Magical Leaf. I then pivot through Nyx, who's of course immune to Shadow Ball. From there, I switch Zeke back in again, who's immune to Psybeam, and finally Fantina decides to dispense with the shenanigans by going for Magical Leaf instead of Confuse Ray, basically guaranteeing our victory. With one final Pursuit, Zeke takes out Mismagius, and we claim our third gym badge. Then as I reach Solaceon Town, I make sure to thank the daycare man for sending me these eggs.
Why, of course, I quite enjoyed watching them be bred. In fact, did you know that in terms of male, human, and female Pokemon breeding, Vaporeon is the most compatible?
Oh god, he's one of those creeps. Heading east to Solaceon Ruins, we can pick up our Waterstone, meaning we can round out a team full of 6 Eeveelutions by evolving Bo into Vaporeon, who I'm keeping as far away as possible from this guy, but our team kind of has an issue. All of our Eeveelutions have terrible moves. They're basically stuck with the weakest possible move of their type, but now that we've reached Veilstone, we can make some pretty substantial upgrades. First, we can pick up some really powerful moves like Fire Blast and Thunder in the department store. There are also some really powerful TMs we can pick up at the game corner if I had even a single coin to my name, meaning there's only one thing to do. Oh hey Looker. Ah, it's you, yes. Well, this is awkward.
One eternity later.
With the game corner TMs, we're able to get some really strong and accurate moves like Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, and Flamethrower. Zeke doesn't really get anything except Protect to go with Wish, and Dex at least gets Swords Dance to make him somewhat useful. Pearl probably gets the most with both Screens and Stab Psychic, and while Bo learns Ice Beam, he's stuck with Water Gun until we can get Surf. With our new movesets, we're way better equipped to handle Veilstone's gym leader Maylene. However, with Lucario being a Steel type, we can't simply sweep with Pearl's Psychic. Instead, we'll have to use a slightly different strategy by first setting up Reflect. This gives us 5 turns of double defense, which isn't much, but hopefully it should be enough to take us through the fight. This does give Meditite a chance to go for Rock Tomb to lower Pearl's speed. This does present a bit of an issue since Pearl won't be able to outspeed Lucario, but even after the speed drop, she's actually able to outspeed both Meditite and Machoke and take them out with a single Psychic each. Being slower than Lucario definitely makes it an issue for Pearl to take it out, which is basically the entire reason we set up Reflect so that Oz can swap in safely. The Metal Claw on the Switch was never going to do anything, it's really the Drain Punch the following turn that we're afraid of. But with the Reflect to boost our defense, the Drain Punch doesn't even take Oz below half, and with a Stab Flamethrower, we can finish off the fight without going past the 5 turns of Reflect. Before the next gym fight, there's really only one important thing for us to do, and it's to pick up the TM for Dig. This is the only damaging ground type move that any of my Eeveelutions can get, and for that reason, it's a very important pickup. We then pretty much immediately go up against Crasher Wake and his water types, which is an incredibly good matchup for us since we have both Ace and Dex to deal with him. If you don't have an electric type, his Gyarados could be a problem, but Ace can easily zap the Serpent out of the sky. Actually, can Gyarados fly? It's never really been made clear. It doesn't fly in the anime, but it definitely does in Legends Arceus. Quagsire comes out second, and being a ground type, Ace can't really do anything with it since we don't have Hidden Power Grass. As I switch to Dex, it goes for Mud Shot, which does lower Dex's speed, but Quagsire's so slow that Dex easily outspeeds the next turn, taking it out with a quad-effective Razor Leaf. This does put us in a bit of an annoying spot as Wake sends in his final Pokemon Floatzel. This thing has Ice Fang, and even though Dex has amazing physical defense, I really don't want to risk a critical hit here, so I swap to Bow. Even with a Meadow Plate to boost Grass-type damage, Dex wouldn't be able to one-shot Floatzel, but even Bow has trouble facing this thing since Crunch does a ton of damage on top of getting a defense drop. Bow will get a bunch of HP back from Wish the following turn, but I don't really want to stay in to test my luck. But baiting Crunch was actually the main point of swapping in Bow, since Ace, unlike Dex, can always survive a critical hit, and furthermore, unlike Dex, can always one-shot Floatzel with a Thunderbolt. And acquiring badge number 5 could be a gateway to many victories, since we now can reach Celestic Town and talk to the Glasses guy. This guy gives you 3 pairs of glasses depending on what time of day it is, the most important pair being the Choice Specs, boosting the holder's special attack by 1 stage at the cost of being locked into whatever move you choose. This is a pretty insane item to get on a team of mostly special attackers, and it allows us to pull off some pretty crazy stunts. For instance, we're forced to take on Barry on the bridge in Canalave City. At this point, the guy has 5 of his 6 Pokemon, only missing his Snorlax. And Snorlax happens to be the only Pokemon on his team that can take a Spec Psychic from Pearl, making this fight an absolute bloodbath since nothing on his team can even outspeed. Next, we face Byron, and we're once again going to put the Choice Specs to good use, this time on Oz. Byron's Steel types have a lot of defense, so we wouldn't want to be using physical moves anyway, and Oz's special attack is perfectly serviceable. With Specs and Stab, Flamethrower easily takes care of Magneton. Second out is Steelix, a defensive behemoth, but its special defense is very lacking. And because Sturdy doesn't let you survive at 1 HP if you're full in this game, we easily take it out in 1 hit with another Flamethrower, leaving only Byron's Bastiodon. We can't actually take this thing out in 1 hit, which is a bit problematic because of Metal Burst. Metal Burst is basically counter or mirror coat against any type of move, physical or special, but it only does 1.5 times damage back. Now, even though Byron's a complete dummy and just goes for Iron Defense here, which means we could have easily taken it out with 2 Flamethrowers, having Oz go down to Metal Burst would probably end the run. So it's a bit too much of a risk to take, and instead I swap into Bow. Bow unfortunately has a similar problem in that he can't one-shot Bastiodon with a single Surf. So in order to play around Metal Burst, I have Bow go for Ice Beam to avoid being one-shot by Metal Burst. A single Ice Beam unfortunately doesn't put us in that range, so I go for a second one, which funny enough happens to get a Freeze. This doesn't end up affecting the battle whatsoever since Bastiodon immediately thaws out and hits me with a Stone Edge. This one does get a crit, dealing a ton of damage to Bow, but at this point it's too late. We've already put Bastiodon in range of that Surf and can easily take it out to claim our 6th gym badge.
What was that tremor? I thought Mount Coronet erupted.
Oh, sorry, that would have been me. Before we get to go north, we have to deal with Team Galactic, which is once again made incredibly easy due to the Choice Specs letting me just one-shot all of Jupiter's Pokemon with Thunderbolts. And at Lake Verity, Mars doesn't put up any more of a fight. Absolutely pathetic. This means we get to travel north through the snowy wastes to reach Snowpoint City, and on our way there, we find this icy rock of particular significance to Nyx. And as she evolves to Glaceon, we we round out our team of all 7 Eeveelutions. And once in Snowpoint City, we immediately take on the next gym leader, Candace. A Sinnoh Ice gym leader without Glaceon does not deserve to be shown mercy. I lead with Oz, who can always survive a critical hit from Sneasel, which is good since that's exactly what immediately happens. From there, we use our trusty choice specs together with Stab Flamethrower to instantly take Sneasel out. Candace then sends in Piloswine, which is somehow slower than Flareon, which lets us once again pick up a swift KO with Specs Flamethrower. Third out is your Abomasnow, which is a bit annoying since Frostlass is the one Pokemon that Flareon can't beat. The fact that Abomasnow comes out first means that we have to deal with Snowcloak because of Abomasnow's Snow Warning. On top of that, Frostlass's Blizzards will be 100% accurate. All these factors could make Frostlass a nightmare to deal with. Obviously, I can't stay in with Oz since I just get instantly outsped, so I swap into Zeke, who gets to tank a resisted Shadow Ball. From here, things get extra iffy as Frostlass starts setting up double teams. Evasion is probably my least favorite mechanic in Pokemon, and obviously I miss my payback. To make my suffering ever more miserable, Frostlass goes for a second double team. But this time, Zeke's not having it, connecting with a payback which almost takes Frostlass out. Pretty much any attack EVs on Zeke would have guaranteed this KO, which is a bit of a bummer. Frostlass getting a bit of HP back here with a Citrus Berry is actually good, since it means Candace won't heal up with a Hyper Potion the next turn. I'm then hit by a Blizzard, and I could have just barely survived the critical hit. After getting a bit of health back from a Citrus Berry of my own, Zeke doesn't end up missing, and we pick up our 7th badge without too much trouble, but that definitely could have been a disaster. This is the part of the game where Cyrus tries to get his bowl cut cult to try and destroy the universe. This is obviously an existential threat to my family, and as a wise man once said,
"You don't turn your back on family."
So I brought the family together, even cousin Eevee, to summit Mount Coronet. And at Spear Pillar, I had to help Horn Guy take on Jupiter and Mars at the same time. My strategy was simple, by first torching the Bronzor that sets up light screen so that we don't get our Specs Flamethrowers depowered. I then made sure to target Perugly to take it out before Bronzor. With only Golbat left on Mars's team, I could easily focus on it, taking it out with a Surf, and in the process, turning this battle into a 2v1, and thus a super easy victory. Now the real challenge is the Distortion World fight versus Cyrus. By this point in the game, this guy has by far the most dangerous team we've seen so far, and honestly is a contender for the most difficult fight in all of Platinum. He leads with Houndoom and immediately misses a Will-O-Wisp against Bo, and as rude as it is to want to burn him, Bo doesn't actually really care about being burned since he's a special attacker. Gyarados comes out second, and this thing is a bit of an issue since Bo doesn't have a way to deal with it. There's no good way to swap into this Gyarados, and the one Pokemon I have that can one-shot it is Ace. Expecting the Earthquake against Bo, I obviously can't switch immediately, so I have to pivot through Zeke. Instead of immediately swapping to Ace, I decide to stay in to see what Gyarados goes for, which ends up being the obvious Waterfall. Zeke then gets some health back with a Citrus Berry, and I set up a Wish. I then just have to go for it. There's basically no way around it, and if Gyarados crits, it's probably the end of the run. Jolteon is not a very bulky Pokemon, so even if Gyarados doesn't crit, which it thankfully doesn't, we still take a ton of damage, which was the entire reason to pass the Wish. Now that we swapped in safely, we can just go for Thunderbolt and the Gyarados is done for. Third out is Weavile, which is a terrible matchup for Ace, so I have to swap out again. This is another horrible matchup. I've got nothing that can swap into this thing. Thankfully, it goes for Fake Out as I send in Oz. It then goes for the high crit move Night Slash, and if this thing gets a crit, it's basically Night-Night. Ozzy narrowly survives, and it's not even a critical hit. At this point, Oz has finally gotten the only physical fire-type move he gets this entire generation, and it's only Fire Fang. Even so, it's enough to take out Weavile, sending in Honchkrow. I start by switching to Bo, who gets hit by a Night Slash. It feels awful to risk yet another crit to a high critical hit ratio move, and because Ice Beam isn't even a one-hit KO, I should have done what I do next at the very beginning, which is swapping into Zeke to resist the incoming Night Slash. This makes Honchkrow's most damaging move Drill Peck, giving us a free switch into Ace. Basically, it was completely unnecessary to risk the crit against Bo, since a single Thunderbolt from Ace would take out Honchkrow from full HP. The additional benefit of having Ace out versus Cyrus's final Pokemon is that we can take out Crobat in one Thunderbolt as well. Before leaving the Distortion World, there's one more Pokemon to face, Giratina. This is not a mandatory fight, and we could easily just run from it. But Nyx never runs away from a fight, and taking on big, powerful dragons is exactly what she was born to do. And she drops Giratina with a single Specs Blizzard. Imagine having a team of 6 Pikachus when you could have 6 Eevees. Lame. At this point, so close to the Pokemon League, I knew Dex would be the one I don't bring to the Elite Four. So with that in mind, I still wanted to give him a taste of the action. In Platinum, Leafeon is a surprisingly good answer to Volkner. It doesn't take too many speed EVs to outspeed Jolteon and set up to +2 attack with a Sword Stance. Jolteon doesn't have a good way to hurt us, so it slows us down with Thunder Wave, which we can easily heal off with a Cherry Berry. Now that we're not paralyzed, we outspeed Jolteon once again the next turn and go for Dig. This is the reason the Dig TM was so important earlier on, since it's the only way we get super effective damage against Volkner's electric types. At +2, it easily takes out Jolteon, but Raichu could be a problem. There's no way Raichu survives the +2 Dig, but Dig being a contact move, it might activate Static. If so, we may have to use our backup plan to deal with Luxray and Electivire. But thankfully, we just don't get punished and stay unparalyzed. Because of this, the battle's over. We're faster than both Luxray and Electivire, and neither of them can handle a +2 Dig. I'm glad Dex got his moment to shine, because now that we're about to take on the Pokemon League, there's no space for Dex on the team, so I'm sending him back to Eterna Forest so he can live out the rest of his life in peace the way he'd want. It'll be tough for him to not get to be there for his family in this final fight, but hopefully he'll get to see everyone again in one piece once it's all over. As for our 6 combatants, I've tried to give them the best possible movesets. Ace doesn't get much outside of electric type moves, so he's got Thunderbolt and Charge Beam, Quick Attack for some priority, and Hidden Power Ice might actually come in handy. Bo also has a somewhat useful hidden power in Fire, giving some extra coverage to Ice Beam, Surf, and Wish. Zeke probably has the weakest moveset, going for more of a support role with Payback, Toxic, Wish, and Protect. Next we've got Oz rocking Flamethrower as his most reliable Fire-type move, and otherwise the physical moves of Fire Fang, Return, and Quick Attack. Nyx is rocking the full Ice-type suite with Ice Beam, Ice Shard, Blizzard, and Mirror Coat. And finally there's Pearl with Psychic, Light Screen, and Reflect, who also ended up being the one to get the Shadow Ball TM. The Sinnoh Elite Four is brutal, with possibly the scariest champion of all time. However, the earliest Elite Four members really aren't that big a threat with their low-level Pokemon compared to the level cap of 59. I've given Ace a wide lens to have a 99% accuracy with Charge Beam. I want to eliminate the chance to miss as much as possible. And as my first Charge Beam defeats Yanmega, Ace even gets a special attack boost. In hindsight, this strategy is a little bit extra. Getting that special attack boost guarantees that we now one-hit KO every single one of Aaron's Pokemon, but there was a much more reliable way to do this, since just giving Ace the choice specs would have given me the special attack boost from the start, not even having to risk the Charge Beam. A little bit of a blunder on my part, but in the end, we accomplished the same goal, taking out every single one of Aaron's Pokemon in one hit with Thunderbolts. Second, we face Bertha, the one fight where I actually really wish we had Leafeon. Dex would have been absolutely perfect for this fight, but Bo's gonna have to do. This means we unfortunately don't have the quad-effective Grass-type move to hit Whiscash with, but I go for Surf instead, which deals over half. Whiscash then goes for Earth Power, but with Vaporeon's massive special defense, it barely does anything and doesn't even get a special defense drop. It then seems like we're speed-tied as Whiscash outspeeds with a Sandstorm, and I go for Wish. I make this in between moves since it basically negates any of the damage that Whiscash does with Earth Power the following turn, because after I wash it away with another Surf, I get all of my HP back from that Wish. Bertha sends in Gliscor, and this thing does have Thunderfang. However, with Stab, Earthquake actually deals more damage. And just for this specific matchup, I made sure to train Bo in defense EVs so that we could take the hit no matter what. From there, Gliscor has a crippling quad weakness to Ice, so we instantly drop it out of the sky with an Ice Beam. This creates a big problem for Bertha since all of her remaining Pokemon are slower than Bo. And to make matters even worse for her, they all get instantly deleted by Splash Plate Surf, granting us a ridiculously easy victory. The third Elite Four member is Flint, master of fire types who, much like Cyrus, leads with Houndoom, so I do the same I did back then and send in Bo. However, this time I immediately run into trouble as Houndoom sets up the sun. This is very bad since a couple of his Pokemon have Solar Beam. Thankfully, Houndoom can't actually learn Solar Beam, and Surf still does decent damage. To get as much damage as possible, Flint hits me with a Dark Pulse, which might even get a flinch, but instead he gets a critical hit. Not flinching is great since it lets me set up a Wish. However, flinching would be totally fine since I'm trying to stall out the sun anyway, and that's exactly what happens with the next Dark Pulse before I get all that juicy HP back from Wish. Then after being hit by another Dark Pulse, I wash away Houndoom's remaining health with a Surf. There is still one more turn of sun, but that doesn't end up being a problem since Flint sends in Infernape next. And while it may have Thunder Punch, with my defense EVs, it barely does any damage at all, and I can set up another Wish. I'm struck by another Thunder Punch, but it can't take me out even with a critical hit, so I'm completely safe. And now that the sun's over, a Splash Plate Surf is enough to take Infernape out in one hit. And once it's down, I even get most of my health back from Wish. Rapidash comes out next, and I was expecting it to, well, I don't exactly know what I was expecting. All I know is I wasn't expecting it to go for Flare Blitz into my Vaporeon. No, please, no. Okay, that was a bad idea. Every single video I make, there seems to be a moment that tops the stupidest thing I've ever done. I don't know why I didn't press Surf, that would have been the most logical option, but here we are. Flint does have his own Flareon, and while this is incredibly based, his has a terrible moveset. He basically relies on the shock value of Overheat and then has Giga Impact for physical coverage. And for that reason, we can easily wash it away with Surf after getting burned by Will-O-Wisp. I even made sure to go for Wish before doing so that we get to almost full HP as Flint sends in his final Pokemon Magmortar. None of my Pokemon want to switch into this thing, and even if they did, they couldn't take it out in one hit, so I'm basically forced to stay in against Thunderbolt. And Bo eats this critical hit like an absolute boss. And being able to tank a super effective hit off of a base 125 special attack stat is a pretty impressive feat. From there, it only takes one Surf to wash away Magmortar, winning us our third Elite Four battle. But this is where things get serious against Lucian's Psychic types. As a kid, I thought this fight was almost as bad as Cynthia, and you definitely always have to respect Lucian. He leads with a really annoying Mr. Mime that likes to set up screens, so I opt to deal with it immediately by taking it out with Specs Shadow Ball. With Mr. Mime dealt with, he sends in his own Espeon. Staring at what she could have looked like, Pearl realized she wouldn't ever want to be anyone else. What's the point of being like every other Espeon when your fur can be a beautiful emerald green? With Lucian's Espeon defeated, she was feeling a lot more confident. However, even with her awesome looking glasses, she can't defeat Bronzong in one hit, so I swap out into Oz. Throughout this run, Oz has unpredictably been one of the most valuable members of the team, and he's about to deliver once again. My best bet is to go for Flamethrower here, which won't quite be enough to take Bronzor out, and it annoyingly sets up a Calm Mind to boost its special defense. Lucian then heals with a full restore before I can go for a second Flamethrower, which still does over half even after the special defense boost. This means Oz can be one of the MVPs of the team once again, taking out Bronzor more easily than anyone else could have done before Lucian sends in Alaka's Gallade. When preparing for the fight, for some reason I had tunnel vision and thought that Lucian would send in Alakazam before Gallade. That way Pearl could swap in safely, but as it is, I just don't have a safe switch, which unfortunately places Oz at the business end of a Stone Edge. You'll always be remembered, dear friend, as the most productive Flareon there ever was, and the opening you're providing for Pearl is invaluable, allowing her to launch a Specs Shadow Ball to take out Gallade. Except, that's not what happened. Even a super effective hit with Choice Specs wasn't enough to take Gallade out. This wasn't at all how it was supposed to go. Not like this. I'm so sorry, Pearl. Except Pearl does it. She holds on through sheer force of will, meaning in the end, Oz's sacrifice wasn't in vain. He faced those rocks so that you could live another day, Pearl, and by defeating Gallade, you've guaranteed victory against Lucian. Alakazam is simply slower than Pearl, and a Specs Shadow Ball completely destroys it. But with Lucian defeated, we've got our toughest opponent yet to take on. Perhaps losing Oz wasn't worth the glory we might bring to the family name, but at this point, it's too late to back down. The doors behind us are barred, so there's no way to leave even if we wanted to. But more importantly, Oz would have wanted us to go all the way. With only 5 Pokemon, defeating Cynthia is far from a sure thing. Her lead Spiritomb is always incredibly annoying, but in this case, we actually have the answer to defeat it. With a held Never Melt Ice, all Nyx has to do is connect with the 70% accurate Blizzard to delete Spiritomb immediately. Her special defense is even quite formidable, so we could have taken a hit if we would have missed. Lucario comes out next, which can outspeed and take out Nyx with a stab Aurasphere, so I swap out into Pearl. It goes for Aurasphere as expected, but because it's a resisted hit, it barely does anything. Psychic may not be a super effective hit because of Lucario's Steel type, but with the Choice Specs and Pearl's massive special attack, it's still enough to one-shot Lucario. And next we face Cynthia's big bad Garchomp. Pearl is not very bulky, so my best bet is to send in Bo and try and go for an Ice Beam. Bo is a very bulky boy and can even survive 2 Earthquakes from Garchomp. That's of course considering the fact that we can't afford either of them being a critical hit. This is a bad time for the bad luck we're due to catch up with us. In complete panic mode, I swap out of Bo into Zeke, and the Dragon Rush on the Switch almost takes Zeke below half, thankfully not getting a critical hit this time. Garchomp then goes for the more accurate Earthquake, which deals just as much damage as Dragon Rush with their shared base power of 100. And with his held Citrus Berry, I hope Zeke can handle one more. The fact that we didn't get crit again at least gives me the chance to Toxic Garchomp, putting it on the clock. Garchomp goes for another Earthquake, getting Zeke down to just 47 HP. By the turn, it's seeming less and less likely that Zeke is gonna bail the team out of this one. By surviving, Zeke at least gets to land a double power payback to get a bit of damage on Garchomp before it's hurt by poison a bit more. Garchomp then actually lands the 70% accurate Dragon Rush, meaning we have to watch another brother fall. As he falls, Garchomp is further hurt by poison, which in turn ends up activating its Citrus Berry to get it back up above half health. But Zeke's sacrifice allows us to send in Nyx, who was born for this exact moment. She's not fast enough to outspeed, so gets hit by a Dragon Rush. Of course she flinched. This was your moment, Nyx. Your moment! And you let it slip! At this point, there's only one thing left to try. Come on, Nyx. I know it's a physical attack, but it's quad weak, and this is what you were born to do. I knew I gave her Ice Shard for a reason, and Nyx managed to pull it off. As we survive the prospect of absolute annihilation, Cynthia sends in Togekiss. But this is a free target for Nyx. Her special attack stat of 130 easily takes out Togekiss, especially with that Never Melt Ice, leading to Cynthia sending in her second to last Pokemon, Milotic. Nyx may be the adopted one, but her bond to this family is as thick as blood, and her commitment to getting us through this fight is absolute, even if it means her own sacrifice. Of course, she's gonna go out on her own terms, connecting with a Blizzard before Surf finally takes her. Ace could have been taken out by a critical hit on the Switch, but through Nyx's sacrifice, he's guaranteed to take out Milotic with a Thunderbolt. At this point, only half the family still stands, but between the 3 of them, they should have what it takes to defeat Cynthia's final Pokemon, Roserade. And with Hidden Power Ice, Ace should be perfectly capable of finishing this fight by himself. However, Pearl's not okay with everybody taking risks but her. Sure, a critical hit would end her here, but she's watched her entire family put everything on the line so that she could make it this far. As she sent one final Psychic, she could hear the entire crowd chanting for the most capable and most beautiful Emerald Espeon. As she watched Roserade fall, she made her family proud, honoring the wishes of her deceased brothers and sister by making it to the Hall of Fame. Upon completing their mission, Ace moved to Eterna Forest to live out the rest of his days with his brother. Inspired by her siblings' courage, Pearl became a world-renowned supermodel, famous for her choice of glasses. Bo ended up continuing the family line, eventually being the grandfather of Sylveon, but that's 2 generations from now. As for the Fallen, they'll always be remembered for their courage and sacrifice. Oz went out the way he lived, in a blaze of glory. Zeke did what he'd always done, protect the family. And Nyx got to fulfill her destiny of defeating Garchomp. And I thank you for hearing their story.